Hey everyone and welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you all my go-to setup for commercial beauty photography. So this is essentially the setup that I'd use for my paid commercial shoots. And I really wanted to share it with you all because I think it's really difficult when you first start getting into doing paid shoots for clients and specifically with commercial photography. It is hard to know what kind of setups to use, and it's really good to have that go-to setup that you can just immediately know will work and will be very versatile, especially when it comes to beauty. A lot of the time you're focusing on things such as the skin tone, making sure that there's enough light in the eyes, and making sure overall that the shadows aren't going to be too distracting, obviously depending on the kind of shoot that you're doing and the kind of client you're working for. But I digress. I think that it's a really important thing to have a go-to setup. So I thought I would share with you all what my favorite setup is to basically start off with. And it's a very versatile setup, as I said, so you can kind of add things in or remove things very easily if you need to tweak the lighting. Now, I've done several shoots in the past year for brands like Burt's Bees and Dimple Colored Contacts, and I felt like on a couple of those shoots I actually used a very similar setup, and to be honest, for a lot of my clients it's a pretty similar setup, unless they've specifically requested something that's a little bit more out there, whether that be maybe with harder lighting or if they're wanting to shoot outdoors. Obviously it's going to be a little bit different then, but this is generally my go-to setup. So the first thing that I make sure I've got is my octabox, and I feel like I don't go to any shoot without my octabox. I think that it's one of the most important tools that a beauty photographer can have, and most people will always say that beauty dishes are going to be the thing that will be make and break for a beauty shoot. I actually highly disagree with this. I think that beauty dishes can be great when they're used in a specific way, but overall I don't find them as versatile as an octabox. I think you can get a really lovely filtered light with octaboxes, and I just really enjoy the shadows that they also leave on the model's face. I also just really love how I can easily rip off filters, stick on different ones, add to the filters. I can really sculpt the light to how I want. You can do a similar thing with beauty dishes, however, it is generally going to be a little bit more of a crisper light. Now, if you want that little bit more of an editorial kind of high-end feel with some of your shots too, I definitely recommend going for the octabox, because I think that you will start to find that octaboxes are that little bit more versatile. You can get a really nice glow if you need that on a particular beauty shoot, but you can also get a really soft editorial feel. So I do think that it's just much more versatile than necessarily using a beauty dish. If you've got both and you want to bring both to a shoot, or you're hiring studio equipment or whatever it is, and there's both there, then that's great, because then you're really covering a large spectrum of lighting modifiers. But I always recommend having an octabox because I just think that it creates the most beautiful light and catch lights, and it's just very versatile. So I always make sure that I've got my octabox, and I tend to only have one layer of diffusion. Now with my octabox I can have several layers, so I can have two, and I can have an inner layer of diffusion, and then I can also have one on the outer side as well. And I tend to usually just have it on the outer side. I just have that one layer because in terms of a go-to setup, it really does tend to give a kind of a softer effect on the face, but it also does pick up a little bit of highlight on the cheekbones and within the eyes. So I just personally love having that one layer of diffusion as opposed to double. I also tend to mainly work with two light setups for beauty photography. It has been very rare to have more than that, even on a client shoot, even if there's been several people in a shot. Now, it really depends how this is actually going to be set up. So if there's quite a number of people, you may need that third light or even a fourth light, depending on the setup that you're using. But for my go-to setup, I just simply use two strobes, and I tend to have my octabox on one as the key light in front of the model. And I've talked about this kind of a setup before, where it is raised high and angled down towards the model's face. That's really going to help with any little butterfly shadows and just really the positioning of those shadows being flattering and looking nice. You need to make sure that it's not raised too high and angled too far down, because then you will start to get darker shadows again. But it's finding that space between you and the model, probably about 1 meter to 1.5 meters or so between you and the subject, and then just adjusting your light as you see fit. You can usually see on the model's face when the shadows become too deep under the eyes here, so you want to kind of find that medium ground where it's looking quite soft, but you can see kind of the shadow just under the nose where it's quite a nice little V shape, and that's usually your sweet spot. So as I mentioned, I will usually have one light as a key light at the front and facing the model. Then I will usually have a light on the backdrop. Now, sometimes I don't have a light on the backdrop. It really depends on the shoot, but a lot of the time we will be working with some colored backdrops, and I tend to make sure that it's showing up the color as true to color on camera as it is in real life. So I think that that's really important to have a light that is pointing towards the backdrop. Now, often for this second light, I will just have another simple square softbox on it with one layer of diffusion. It's just a really simple setup in that way, and it's going to diffuse the light a little bit so you're not getting any hard light across the backdrop or any streaks or anything like that, and it will just be a little bit softer. So it's usually positioned at about a 45-degree angle off to the side behind the model, and then that just helps to kind of illuminate the backdrop that little bit more. You definitely don't need it raised as high as the key light or angled down so much. You can kind of have it just spreading across, straight across the backdrop, and kind of have it at a lower level. And then of course I'll have my trusty white reflector. So this white reflector will kind of depend. You can use a smaller one if you're only working with one subject, but I actually have quite a big one as well that I work with when I'm working with several people in a shot. And I find that that really helps just to bounce the light back into the eyes a little bit more, and then just to fill in some of the shadows that might be appearing on the model's face to make them appear just even that little bit more filled in and soft. But I really like moving the reflector in there from time to time. Sometimes you don't need the reflector at all. It really depends on the type of shoot, and quite often I'll be with the client in the room with my laptop tethered to my camera so they can actually see how the lighting's looking, and I'll just ask them. A lot of the time that's the best way to go if you've got a client on set and you've got your laptop there being tethered. It's really important to just check with them sometimes and be like, is this the kind of vision that you had for this particular shoot? Is the lighting something that is really suitable for what we're working with here? Because sometimes clients don't necessarily know what they want until they see it. So they might say that they want a really highlighted light which is going to show up all the glow on the model's face, but when they see it in person they might be like, oh, okay, maybe we could diffuse that a little bit more, or maybe it can be a little bit softer, it's not quite what we had in mind. Sometimes it is really difficult and you do need to have that conversation with them even on set about what's working and what's not. But that is essentially my go-to setup for a lot of my commercial shoots. Now, as I mentioned, it's really easy to change this lighting setup. I can add a grid to my octabox if I want to direct the light a little bit more. I can remove all the diffusion away and the grid to have a really hard light, or I also have a reflector dish that I can use instead of the octabox in my kit to really create that hard lighting. So there's very easy ways to tweak some of that lighting setup, but I do find that it's a very good go-to one for commercial clients. Just to touch on video setups as well, because I also do video for a lot of my clients, I tend to use a really deep umbrella, so kind of in an octabox style, but more so towards a deep umbrella that usually has one layer of diffusion, and I will just use that as the main key light in front of the model, again raised high and angled down, and usually I'll try to make sure that's a little bit more of a powerful LED light that I'm using. And the reason I like to use the deep umbrellas for a video setup is they tend to spread the light pretty well across the backdrop too, so sometimes you'll only need one light for a video setup, which is quite often all I ever need. It's good to have a really powerful LED as well that can really give you that power that you need for just using one light, and it just makes sure that you're not having any issues on the day with lighting and changing your settings and things like that, because I've also had that happen with really low power LED lights before. So it's really important that you make sure you choose a light for video that is going to really illuminate your subject. And that is basically my go-to setups. So I hope you really enjoyed this video today, and if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, make sure you do, because I'll be posting a lot more videos like this one. Let me know down in the comments what your go-to setup is for a lot of your clients, because I'd really love to hear your opinions and what you like to use as well. And also let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next on my channel, because I'm always open to requests. But thank you so much as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.